We begin the story on a moonlit night in the dark forest where someone is cutting a tree with a chainsaw. The sound of the saw tears through the silent night. She takes a deep breath. Everything is ready. The tree cutting is done. Only one last step remains. She inserts a tube into the tree trunk. Nutrients are pumped in. This tree must be very hungry. It can absorb it all. But in the end, why did the forest owner stop to let the trees become like this? They really don't appreciate life at all. Now she just needs to check. The trees inside, and then it's done. She will come back tomorrow to see how they are. Until then, that day was just an ordinary day like any other. She went to the hospital to see her husband's overdue bills. She returned to check the tree that had just been treated. She argued with a customer who had owed hospital fees for over a month. Then she went back up the mountain to check the abandoned trees. A day like any other. Fewer than usual, but it should be that way. In the forest, a man was begging for his life, pleading for mercy, and promising to reveal everything he knew. But the man in black coldly replied that he was wrong here. What he should beg for was death. The tragedy was just beginning, and at that moment the main character witnessed everything. Right before her eyes was a case of disappearance and disposal to avoid violating platform policies. I will use euphemisms throughout the story. Everyone. She should have called the police, but as she stepped back, she accidentally made a slight noise. The attacker immediately froze. Hearing that sound, he knew he would have to deal with one more body. The saw in his hand dropped. The girl suddenly realized there was another body. He looked like a professional assassin. Now she had been discovered. What should she do? If she moved, he would see her, panicked and completely clueless. The killer turned his cold gaze. Noticing her presence, their eyes met. He asked her if she wasn't going to run. She trembled in panic and dashed through the forest, leaving him behind, which made him laugh with delight. She hurriedly called the Wuyang police station. Breathing heavily, she reported that someone was burying bodies behind the hospital on the mountain. They had to come immediately. The officer asked if she was sure about what she saw. She confirmed firmly and said there were 2 people. The officer told her to stay calm and first give her name. She replied, "I am Lee Jeon." She had no time to explain more. The police said they would depart immediately, but if the report was false, she would be punished. Before she could say more, thin strands wrapped tightly around her neck, making the phone fall to the ground. The killer spoke in a hoarse voice. "You forgot the chainsaw. Hold it tight. You don't want to die this way." She had lived her whole life with the only wish to be peaceful, without trouble, and finally was about to reach that life. But she absolutely did not intend to die at the hands of this killer. Gripping the chainsaw, she swung hard, striking straight at his head. The strands around her neck loosened. The killer received a wound right on his forehead. Their eyes met, and in her eyes reflected the image behind him. The man being buried alive struggled to get up, using a stone in his hand to strike the killer's head. She was stunned and shocked by that powerful blow. The killer began to lose consciousness, then staggered and fell down the cliff. His body hit the ground hard. The man dropped the stone, hurriedly fled the scene. Lee Seon was frozen with fear, witnessing everything. And that was the beginning of her secretly caring, her secret patient, a vegetative patient who had been motionless for 2 years. 2 years later, we see Lee Seon standing with the principal of a school, explaining that the tree is constipated. She said what? She meant the tree cannot excrete normally like humans. Plants also need to excrete to maintain health. Hearing this, the principal thought she was talking nonsense. His voice unconsciously rose high. But then he tried to lower his voice, saying, "This tree is the symbol of our school. It is green and connected to the students. Please treat it. You are a green doctor, an expert in research, care, diagnosis, and surgery of trees when necessary to keep them healthy." Lee Seon replied, "Rest assured, leave it all to me. The treatment process is not complicated. In short, the tree is constipated because after absorbing nutrients, it cannot excrete like humans." But in fact, the principal had no good intentions. He thinks Leon is just a fool. He only wants her to treat the tree incorrectly so it dies, then make her pay for the treatment costs, then demand additional compensation. After all, these trees will be cut down anyway, but for now, he wants to make a profit by cheating Leon. At that moment, Leon suddenly asked him if he had buried anything under the tree's roots. The principal pretended to be clueless. Leon said that recently she heard the school had built another area. Maybe some leftover bricks, tiles, or cement bags were all buried under the tree roots. Those things harden like stone when mixed with water. Mixed into the soil, the tree cannot grow and will get root rot disease. The principal completely didn't understand what she was saying. Lee Seon knew well they must have been happy to save on waste disposal costs, right? She would report this to the city hall. Then they would have to pay back many times that amount. And as she said, excretion is important for humans, animals, and plants alike. After finishing, as she turned away, the principal hurriedly called her back. "Wait, let me explain clearly." But Leon understood that if she returned to the hospital in this situation, her superiors would be angry because she had affected the reputation. So she turned back, quickening her steps toward the principal. She was a doctor wanting to be the voice of the green trees. She was best at saving their lives, and depending on the situation, she also knew how to remove weeds. Moreover, she also liked to get rid of people like the principal. She handed him her business card. She hoped he would frequently visit the Green Tree Hospital. Spruce rode a motorcycle on the way back to the hospital. Lee Yeon thought silently, the only thing others want from a doctor is to look down on her. Just because she was a female doctor, they tried to sabotage her. She was too familiar with this male-dominated environment. She received a call from the hospital director. If Lee Jeon didn't arrive in 5 minutes, she would open the door on the second floor. This stunned her. It turned out, the director heard strange noises from upstairs. Lee Jeon quickly said the head of department must have misheard. How could an empty room make noise? Yes, director, sorry, but I have called a locksmith. Lee Yun panicked and told her to wait. She would be there in 5 minutes, actually 3 minutes. Meanwhile, absolutely do not open the door. Then she hung up, but the director told the locksmith to start working. The reason Lee Jong didn't want the director to open that door was because there was a dangerous plant being treated inside. At that moment, Leon rushed to the hospital. She took off her helmet and hurried upstairs. The locksmith was about to remove the lock when he tried to start. Leon ran up the stairs in time, hurriedly told the director to wait a moment, and told the locksmith he could go home. Payment would be made later. She shouted she had warned the director not to enter the second floor room, but the director said that was just an excuse. To hide something, she said sternly, "Don't you trust me? We've known each other for years. Even if there's gold in there, I wouldn't take it." If it's real gold, Lee Yan didn't care whether the director took it or not. But this matter was different. She tried to think of a reason why the director shouldn't enter. Because if anything happened with what was inside the room, the director's life would be in danger. Everything started with a man named Kwon Ji-suk. He had a deal with her. It all began 2 years ago on the day that changed her entire life. When she witnessed everything and saw the assassin lying motionless under the cliff, Kwon Ji-suk had imprisoned her in an unknown place. That place was a slaughterhouse, a horrifying scene with a row of butchers sitting in a straight line, at a long table. "I know you. Do you know why?" He looked coldly at her. "The person she left half dead on the hill behind was my younger brother." Lee Seon was stunned upon hearing that. These two brothers were clearly abnormal. She tried to explain he misunderstood her. She was only defending herself, not the cause of his condition. That person was sending another to meet their ancestors. He was burying someone alive, simply put. His voice was angry as he was interrupted while happily burying someone alive. Lee Seon was deeply shocked, realizing she couldn't reason with Ji-suk. She really wasn't the one who defeated him that day. She only went up the mountain to care for the trees. The person buried alive was the one who attacked him, with a rock from behind. Indeed, she fought back with a chainsaw, but it wasn't serious at all. Ji-suk's eyes were calm and steady. "My brother has extremely sharp ears. He's not stupid." Or so indifferent that she didn't realize someone sneaked up behind to attack her. B.A. Lion didn't know what to do. She had to escape somehow, but really didn't know how in this place, and was tied up. In the end, what else could she do? B.A. Ji-seok told her that whether she used a rock or saw to hit him, it didn't matter to him. As long as he could make her the perfect culprit, it wouldn't be difficult. As if she was the one who attacked, causing his younger brother to fall into a vegetative state. The only thing he wanted was for someone to pay for this. But Leon had no idea that the assassin had fallen into a vegetative state. Now, she clearly understood she could never escape from here. This was the end of her life now. Giseok said that in exchange for her life, he wanted to negotiate a deal. If she had any sense, she could leave here peacefully. He asked if she understood what he was saying. She replied yes. This was a mutually beneficial deal. "Good, you understand quickly." He handed her a piece of paper. The guards removed her handcuffs, leaving some marks on her wrists. He said they would soon catch the real culprit and bring justice to her. However, until then, he wanted her to take care of his younger brother who was in a vegetative state. He wanted her to find a way to prevent the brother from leaving the room. If possible, it was best to tie his legs. And then 2 years passed. Late at night, Lee Zeon climbed the stairs, entering the second-floor room where the assassin lay. He was still in a deep sleep like a tree on the second floor of this house. For 2 years, the only information Lee Zeon knew was just his name. The day after the forest incident, the burial site was cleaned up without a trace. The police investigated but found no fingerprints. Lee Zeon was punished for false reporting. As soon as she signed the contract with GSEO, the second floor was built in the blink of an eye. Always with doctors on duty to diagnose and care for Chu every second. But above all, the atmosphere, the overwhelming power of GSEO weighed heavily, accusing her, making her suffocate. That statement was absolutely not an exaggeration, meaning until the real culprit was caught, she had to find every way to keep this assassin in Spruce Hospital, so she could only pray that Chu never woke up. If he didn't wake up, Leon could continue living. Every day she silently prayed that Chu would never open his eyes, but she didn't know that one of his fingers had slightly moved. The next morning, her superior showed her a photo of the son of Sun Landscaping Company. She was asked what she thought of him. The boss looked at the photo. She asked if the young man would be her new partner. The boss shook his head. No, this young man was an opportunity for Lee Jeon. Sun's son had come to Korea to date. If Lee Jeon didn't seize the chance to meet him, what other chance would there be? She asked what kind of opportunity the boss meant. The boss said if things continued like this, they wouldn't last long in this hospital. They had lost many big contracts to Dong SEO Hospital. But no matter what, the people at Dong SEO Hospital were very skilled, not ordinary. Dongsail Hospital, with a newly built 5-story building, noisily appeared in Wadum, starting to release fiercely competitive contracts in fields like landscaping, planting, construction, and agriculture, quickly taking over all the contracts of Spruce Hospital. She recalled some terrible memories from her time working at Dongsail. The boss's call brought her back to the present. She wanted her to regain the contracts that had been stolen. She asked how to do it. The boss told her to have a drink with Sun's son, to become close, but Lee John immediately refused. She was not like her boss, who was always like a poisonous snake, full of evil schemes. The boss grimaced when she heard her say that, then she shouted, asking what nonsense she was spouting. The boss reminded her to think again, saying she didn't have the skills to be a gold digger, but to think about the future of the hospital and herself. At least she should properly greet him so people would recognize her later. Lee Seon asked how the boss knew Sun's son had returned to Korea. The boss replied that Old Man Sun had told her. She wondered why he told her. The boss said they used to have a fairly close relationship. Then the boss crossed her arms and began lecturing Lee Yeon that a good husband was brought by fate but must be chosen with vision and wisdom. If she didn't know how to take advantage of her youth, later she would be left like a moldy piece of bread. The next morning, Lee Yeon couldn't stand having to study civic education anymore, so she went outside to check the garden. The boss helplessly watched, thinking that maybe Lee Yeon would live alone her whole life. But for Lee Yeon, having a husband was like a poison. She just wished to live peacefully alone, taking care of plants for a long time. A life without Bon Chen was like the quiet life she had now, although that peace was never fully guaranteed, because on the second floor there was still a murderer lying there. The truth was truly terrifying. She was always afraid he would wake up, to the point that even in her own house day after day, she couldn't feel at ease. But gradually, that anxiety turned into a strange relief. It was time for her to bathe and then go upstairs. Going upstairs before bed had become a ritual to end the day, to make sure tomorrow would be as safe as today, and to pray that Chu wouldn't wake from his coma. But at that moment, he was no longer lying on the bed. Where was he? She suddenly remembered the agreement signed with GSEO. If anything happened to his younger brother, she would be accused of murder. She had to find him at all costs. But before she could realize it, Chu was standing right next to her. He looked exactly like a ghost in the darkness. Suddenly, he pushed her down onto the bed and pinned her down. How could that be? Cho had been bedridden for 2 years. His muscles should have wasted away. Where did this strength come from? B.A. Lee Jong was shocked and begged him to let go. Now she had to stay calm in this situation. She had no choice but to keep calm. She reassured Chu that he had just woken up, so his mind was confused. But she would explain clearly that his current physical condition was abnormal and that he needed to let her call a doctor. So first, he should release her. But Cho leaned close to her ear and said he didn't want to hear any more words. He only wanted her to answer the first question. Had she locked him up, or was he the one who had locked her up? Lee Seon hurriedly replied, "No, it's not like that at all. Chu had been through a life like that, so why would he think that way? This wasn't a dangerous situation. It was just that he had been in a coma too long, bedridden for 2 years, and only now could he barely get up, so she begged him to calm down. Hey, Mr. Artist, the drawing is a bit off. Bedridden for 2 years, but it seems like the younger brother isn't paralyzed, right? He's been holding the same position all this time, which looks uncomfortable." At that moment, Cho grabbed her hand and pinned her down again. Their eyes met. Chu's eyes shone in the dark. What kind of look was that? Like a beast's eyes sparkling in the night, but at the same time empty, like a shallow well, so clear that nothing remained. Cho kept hearing someone calling his name. He thought maybe it really was his name. But what did that mean? He asked her, "Are you someone important to me? Or someone I can eliminate anytime?" As he spoke, he twisted a syringe in his hand, threatening to harm her. Clearly, Chu couldn't even remember his own name. He didn't know who she was. If so, maybe she could find a way to stay safe from this man. She had to fight to survive. That's why she spoke seriously to Chu, saying she was hurt when he said that. Didn't he know how important she was to him? She began to show her acting skills, telling him they had a deep relationship. He thought so too, that they were closely connected and couldn't be easily separated. As she spoke, she recalled everything that had happened. Her whole body trembled violently. Cho reached out to lift her face, but why was she shaking so much? Had she once cut off his finger and sold it? Or was she just an empty-headed fool with a stupid body drained of strength? Thinking carefully, he wasn't sure. The only thing he remembered were these filthy words. Just waking up after 2 years, so he was rambling nonsense. Please forgive Chu for this part. She asked why he said such things and affirmed that they had a very good relationship. He was always gentle with her. He even put a ring on her finger. In fact, that was when he used fishing line to tie around her neck, almost about to die. He asked if their relationship was really like that. Leon replied yes, but he still thought he was a bastard. Really, because of how she spoke, it seemed like she was brainwashed. She frantically waved her hand, hurriedly explaining it wasn't like that. But deep inside, she really had that thought, in her panic. She was explaining that he never forced her to do anything. He never used violence brutally like today, nor did he ever threaten anyone. He never did anything bad to her. But all those things were just desires deep in her heart, while her facial expression and fearful attitude were completely the opposite. He frowned, bowed his head closer, and reached out to hold Lee Jong's face. He asked why. Why? He couldn't do anything bad. What was holding him back? Lee Jong answered because it was predetermined by the law. The law? What does that mean? She doubted, trying to come up with an answer. She remembered what her boss once told her. That part was nonsense, meaningless. She gathered all her courage to speak. She couldn't let Cho act rashly because that would harm herself. Right now, she had to make Cho stand still. She told him that she was his wife. Clearly, that was a lie, but she had to say it to stop him from hurting her. As soon as she heard it, Chu's head throbbed painfully, and he collapsed, exhausted in Leon's arms. She tried to shake him awake, but it was useless. That night, a deadly seed was planted. One morning, Seon began treatment for a tree struck by lightning during a storm. That tree was planted the day the woman gave birth to her son. Now her son was in the military, and the tree was the only thing she had left. Seon checked a bit, feeling the condition was quite serious, but fortunately the roots were not damaged and could fully recover. The boss asked if she could really save the tree. If handled carelessly, the condition could worsen, and if careless, it would be very dangerous. Seon replied that they had to try their best, but first, no need to choose an auspicious day. No good month or anything, just start by protecting the injured part with iron chains. She asked the boss if there were any local herbal medicines in the hospital. She nodded but was about to say something else when he said she needed to make a phone call and would return immediately. But while talking with the doctor, he said he didn't know when Che would wake up. This was unreasonable because she had seen him awake. Even talking with him, he had pressed close to her. The doctor didn't know how to explain. Actually, what he meant was not that Chu hadn't woken up. A month before Lee Jong contacted the hospital, it was true that Chu had woken up after 2 years of coma. After being transferred to the hospital, she had personally confirmed for a week he showed an amazing recovery ability, but since then, the patient began to show strange symptoms related to hypersomnia, which is a disease also called sleeping beauty syndrome, or more simply, excessive sleeping symptoms. All necessary tests had been done, but no clear cause was found except memory loss. The brain showed no abnormalities. Now they could only suspect. They had to monitor the progression. Indeed, that syndrome, once you fall asleep, you can't be sure when you will wake up. With this patient, sleep time had gradually increased from 3 days to 5 days, and now it had been 12 days without waking up. She thought so. Doctor decided to transfer the patient home for Lee Jong to care for. She panicked and asked again. So Chu was not in a vegetative coma, just no one knew when he would wake up, right? The doctor confirmed yes. That made her feel relieved. She happily thanked the doctor and hung up. She apologized to the boss for making her wait too long and then turned to the woman saying, "The tree would definitely be saved, don't worry." The woman sighed in relief. The boss noticed Lee Jion's mood had improved a lot, but the doctor paid attention to her tense and somewhat unstable voice. He forgot to tell her one thing. The syndrome he mentioned was also called Clean 11 syndrome. Usually this syndrome not only causes long sleep but also strange behaviors, like abnormal eating, irritability, even excessive sexual desire, but he didn't mention that to Lee Seon. Although no one knew when he would wake up, he could tell her next time. Surely director Kyun Ji-sok must be very worried seeing his younger brother in that state, but he didn't mention anything about that to Lee Seon. Even though no one knows when he will wake up, can't he tell her next time? Surely director Kyun Ji-sek must be very worried seeing his younger brother in that condition. It would be best to take him to a major hospital for treatment, yet they brought him back to that old, dilapidated house, even though it wasn't something he needed to investigate. Just doing his duty and getting paid would be enough, but the repeated complaints when waking up really made the doctor uneasy. That time when Cho asked if he could say something, the doctor replied, "Okay, please go ahead." He muttered a sentence, "Please don't wake up." This made the doctor widen his eyes, not understanding what was going on. It was already dark. Leon happily went upstairs to the second floor. She believed that now everything would be different because she could change it. It had been 2 years. Her heart tightened every time she stepped up here, even though it was just a crazy lie. Well, pretending. Being his wife seemed to have changed something inside him after a month. She began thinking about the words she had said. She kept pounding her feet on the bed, regretting having blurted out the first thing that flashed in her mind. But now that man was in a state no one knew when he would wake up. That meant she had a chance to fix everything somehow. Indeed, a rare stroke of luck. It was already late. The medical staff reported that they had moved Chu to the second floor. She went in to see if he was sleeping. But when she entered, he was not in the room, meaning that bastard had escaped outside. She began searching everywhere. Calling his name, she shouted hoarsely, exhausted, thinking that with his still injured body, he couldn't have gone far. But it turned out he had gone quite far from the house. She thought to herself, if she couldn't find him, what would happen? At that moment, she noticed some bloodstains. Looking up ahead, she saw scattered chicken feathers right in front of her. It was Cho. His clothes were covered in blood. She wanted to turn and run, but had to hold back, regain her composure, and step forward. She had to take Cho home immediately. With this condition, he must have had a hard time moving. She asked why he went outside, but first demanded he put the chicken down, so both of them turned back. Chu had something in his mouth. He started chewing and then spat out a chicken neck bone. Ew, disgusting. That stunned her. She couldn't believe he had bitten and killed a live chicken right in front of her. She wondered if his brain injury was simply amnesia. "Where have you been?" he asked her. The only face he felt familiar with was hers. The door wouldn't open. She recalled that Chu had broken the back door to find her. She told herself to stay calm. He was unstable, but there were still many chances to take advantage of the situation. She told him that things must be very confusing. She was a doctor currently taking care of him, but a doctor for plants. Haha, the painter. I notice he often draws sensitive camera angles. She told him he needed to know he had been asleep. For a long time, his body was too weak to wake up for a long period. That's why now his body might be very unstable, seeing things that don't exist, or hearing strange voices, just brain tricks. She continued approaching and explaining. It was all just a dream. That's why both had to go back so he could sleep deeply. And when he woke up, he would feel better. When Cho heard it was just a dream, he immediately dropped the chicken. Maybe it was true. If everything were real, she probably wouldn't be able to stand now. I seriously suggest the painter not to draw such blatant low-angle shots anymore. Such sensitive angles, surely the ladies don't like it, and neither do we men. Right, guys? Cho confessed in his dream he only saw himself having physical relations, and he did it with the woman considered his wife, so he wasn't too confused. On the contrary, now he was even clearer that he had a wife. As he spoke, he moved closer to her. Lion suddenly stepped back in fear. Her legs were wrapped by vines. Leo approached closely. Li Yun just wanted to escape. She knew Chu was confused. She wanted to find an excuse to run away, but the trap she set tightened even more, making her unable to take a single step. Chu asked her name. He wanted to know her name. Should Li Yun tell the truth? He warned coldly he didn't want to ask more than 3 times. Finally, she answered. Cho tried to remember her name, but it was even more hopeless than he imagined. He questioned, "Is it because I'm useless that you want to abandon me?" Li Yun hurriedly said she was just worried. Surely this made him confused and uncomfortable. He continued asking, "So you did this because of me?" Li Yun nodded slightly. "First, she had to get out of this situation." He continued asking, "So you did that because of me?" Leon nodded slightly. "First you have to escape this situation, then think about what's next." Chu, dissatisfied, said, "Is that what you call caring? He looks like a zombie right now." She herself said they were legally married. Now she plans to abandon him. As if discarding a redundant relative, Leon was trembling, nearly breaking down in tears. Seeing that Chu reassured himself, maybe he really is her husband, since he couldn't find her. Anger quickly rose in him, probably just because his nature is fierce. But it seems he truly loves Leon, doesn't he? He once intended to kill me without realizing it. She fell into the whirlpool of Cho's thoughts, but he still had a big weakness. He knew nothing, so for now she still held the initiative, at least she believed so. She told him he needed to heal his wounds, so first both had to go home. Upon hearing the word home, Chu immediately asked, "Do you mean our honeymoon house?" Sao she knew it was a lie, but eventually nodded. It seems dealing with him will be more complicated than imagined. Both returned home. She looked exhausted, and he was always bloody and messy. So why did she look so weak? Grandpa Cho, have some self-respect. All the way Cho asked countless questions like an interrogation, while she had to push him on a cart so he wouldn't hurt his foot. Chu really wanted to walk the whole way, but Lee Seon said if he kept walking barefoot, the soles would tear even more, and if something happened to his body, she would be responsible. First, she told him to wash and change clothes. Meanwhile, she would find the first aid kit. Her care made him feel drawn in. She found the medical kit and carefully bandaged the wound on his hand. It must have hurt a lot, but he didn't flinch. The two looked at each other. She bowed her head, not understanding why he looked at her like that, like a beast eyeing its prey. She just wanted to end everything quickly. His wound was bandaged, but to be sure, tomorrow the doctor would assess his condition more thoroughly. Now she had to leave. Chu asked why, since they were husband and wife. They should sleep together, not separately. Lee Seon heard this and was shocked, quickly explaining that maybe he was right, but he was still sick and needed comfortable rest. Then he objected, saying even though he was sick, he was no longer in a vegetative state. Yeah, no longer vegetative, but shifted to an animal state. A person without AI eating raw chicken? Lee Yon didn't know how to handle it, all because of her own lie. Chu got closer and whispered in her ear, "Is it because we are strangers?" he asked. "Or because I'm not like the husband in your memories?" His voice deepened. His sad face suddenly became gentle like a kitten. He said he would choose to remain silent like a tree, not harsh, not forcing, nor threatening. He promised to behave like the husband she once knew, and so he wanted her to sleep next to him, and thus they both lay down. She was lying next to a murderer. He wanted to ask her many things, but she just hoped he would fall asleep soon. He wanted to know why he had to be hospitalized, why he ended up like this. In short, he wanted to know everything. At first she made up that they had gone to the mountain and met with an accident. Luckily she wasn't seriously injured. Che wanted to know how long they had been married. She answered 2 years ago. So after marriage, she had taken care of him all that time. He felt guilty for being a burden to her. Ah, well, she's a plant doctor specializing in caring for plants. So in another plant species, it might not be a problem. He then asked how long they had dated. The questions got harder and harder. She had no experience in this area. If he dug deeper, she wouldn't be able to answer reasonably. She quickly said, "To finish this, we live together, share a house, share a bed," right after they met. He was slightly surprised. Right after meeting? Yes, she continued to lie. That they spent the night together the first time they met, immediately blending, and she thought he was the ideal man. He asked coldly, a one-night stand the first time? His eyes always looked empty and soulless. So scary. Lee Yan hurried to deny, it's not like that. He sweet-talked me and then seduced me to bed. Chu smiled fiercely and asked back, is that really how it happened? His eyes and half-smile looked very sly, somewhat mysterious. He admitted, if that was true, he was indeed a shameless man. At this point, Leon couldn't stand that expression anymore. She just wanted to erase that image of Cho from her mind. She didn't understand why the story took this turn. If they already shared a blanket because they were husband and wife, the next step would be intimacy. She couldn't imagine it and had to stop it. Not everything he said was true. Actually, we are not compatible. That matter, the face showing disdain, suddenly felt tired upon hearing that. Huh? What did you say? She quickly corrected. I meant that night we weren't in sync, so we failed. Maybe both of us are clumsy. Luckily, she didn't say it was Gio, otherwise fate would be like that chicken this morning. Chu raised his hand to cover his face. This was even more shocking than his memory loss. Exactly where did the problem lie? Because usually, when men hear this, it's like an unspoken truth that the other party is criticizing. Running out of money before going to the market is humiliating. No place to put it all. So Lion started to rummage through his memory, gathering all the experiences of 32 years of life, trying to find a reasonable explanation. Then suddenly she thought. She told him the size wasn't right. Every time we did it, I didn't feel anything, and you never made me reach orgasm. Besides, I don't have much desire anyway. What? It's like saying a rat's tail is stirring the fat. How can you not feel anything? Trying hard to think, then blurted out the answer. Oh my god. Then she continued thinking and making up a story that from the first time we met. She thought he was like a monk. Both of them always kept a pure and healthy relationship after that conversation. Chu lay down, sighed, put his hand on his forehead, wondering if for the past 2 years she had been taking care of him in a vegetative state. While the new relationship was just beginning, it seemed she really loved him quite a lot, but with Lee Yeon, misunderstandings only piled up. For now, everything was still fine. The more she suppressed, the more she needed a bigger layer of misunderstanding. Just hoping he was fast asleep, she silently prayed to the tree god for her to sleep a long time, even if she never woke up. But just as she clasped her hands to pray, he was still awake, even very alert. Who told you to say a man who can't do anything is foolish? He turned to glare at her. What do you mean by saying I'm clumsy? He asked if it was because the foreplay was awkward, or his skills were lacking, or what exactly needed to be clarified. A deep lesson for Lee Jong and the ladies. Nothing is more painful than telling a man he's weak in that matter. So directly like this, ha 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 ha. If that's true, just keep quiet or voluntarily take care of yourself. Just nourish yourself, okay? Saying it out loud is a disaster. Lisa said she didn't remember clearly. But that night, everything ended very quickly. To sum up, she said he was not persistent at all. Hearing this, Chu was completely stunned, eyes wide and pale like a boiled pig. It was like stabbing him through the heart. He was stunned, eyes wide, staring fixedly at the ceiling. I laughed so hard at this part. I'm giving a bit too much personal opinion because it's too funny. Please forgive me. Now she just needs to be patient so Cho sleeps as long as possible. She just wants that syndrome to act up so she can live peacefully. The next morning, Leon opened her eyes waking up. Cho had woken up earlier. She asked if she slept well. The atmosphere seemed to stop. Her head hadn't finished spinning. Then realizing, she jumped up like possessed, wondering what was going on. How come he was awake? Isn't he supposed to have hypersomnia? What happened to the sleepwalker? A while later, the doctor came to check Chu's condition. He thought it was still too early to conclude. Chu was in a state where he could fall into a prolonged sleep any time, even tomorrow. He wanted to find a clear pattern and needed more data from dreams, meaning he might wake up tomorrow. Because the environment at home and hospital were very different, the doctor suspected something had caused him to wake up. Cho exchanged words with the doctor. Last night I slept with my wife. Hearing that, the doctor immediately turned to look at Lee John, but she avoided his gaze. The doctor asked, so does that mean you two had relations? She quickly waved her hand. No, absolutely not. The doctor said they would try some other methods. But for now, it would benefit the patient if they continued sleeping together to monitor the progress. Hearing that, Lee Yan felt like falling into an abyss. She sat watching TV after hearing she had to sleep with Chu. Her mind was exhausted, especially if he started walking on the first floor. She didn't know what to say to the boss. She imagined all kinds of lies, but knew well she couldn't fool the boss. The Chu family was a master in male-female relationships. Seeing through relationships, no way to fool her. Above all, she was tired of handling everything alone. But if this news leaked, who knows what GSEO would do to the Chu family. However, hearing reporters on TV say, if something beyond their ability happens, they should report to the police or at least ask for help from those around them. And so she decided to tell everything to Mrs. Chu, who completely believed her story. The lady scolded her for hiding everything, and even pretending to be the wife of that murderer. She was beaten again for this foolishness. Leon Thonmin, not knowing what else to do, decided that she only made that decision out of fear. Her boss said that once she pretended to be his wife, she would be deeply involved with that murderer. Leon really didn't want it to go that far. But if she didn't do it, both their lives would be in danger. Leon just wanted Mrs. Chu to treat her as a married woman. To fool the public, her boss asked where that guy was now. Leon was about to answer when Chu called her. The boss turned her head and saw the young man coming down the stairs. He was truly attractive. Also handsome, but with slightly weird hair and soulless eyes that really sent chills down one's spine. Leon hurriedly reminded Mrs. Chu to be careful. However, Mrs. Chu calmly called him her son-in-law. Leon could only be speechless at her boss's boldness. Both sat down to talk. This was the first time Che heard about this hospital. He asked if this was a care hospital. He asked what Kia had done before to make a living. She was startled and blurted out. He replied that he used to plant flowers in the hospital, but the truth was he had buried bodies in the mountain. The boss knew she was cleverly manipulating him, but it was hard to believe that this young man had buried bodies. The boss thought to herself that his face looked like an angel. At that moment, Cho called Mrs. Chu mother-in-law and wanted to sit next to his wife, Lee Jun, but she did not respond. He didn't understand what was happening. From Lee Jun's perspective, she thought if she kept him waiting too long, he might get angry, so she had to avoid conflict immediately. She quickly sat next to him. Chu suddenly brightened up, but Ba had a pensive look. Ba understood that it seemed everything was starting to get fun, although no matter how you looked at it, the beginning and end of this relationship were not in Lee Jun's hands. Especially with someone like him. Cho asked her if her mother-in-law was important to her. Lee Seon answered yes, so he had to make a good impression on her. He immediately apologized to Mrs. Chu. Lee Seon said that before, Kia was a decent and polite person. He affirmed that maybe it would take some time for him to return to being the husband and son she remembered, but it wouldn't take long. He said the doctor also said it wouldn't be too difficult because he really wanted to recover normally as soon as possible. Hearing the word recover normally, Lee Seon felt uneasy. She awkwardly advised him not to rush. If he recovered normally, no one here would be safe. If he was too impatient, it would cause damage to his body. She told him to just continue as he was now. She kept calling his full name. Quan Chu-u, Kia. This made him curious. He bent down and asked coldly why she called him by his full name. He requested her to stop calling him that way. He didn't want her to treat him like a stranger. He wanted her to call him Cho, not Quan Cho. He was a man with only one thing on his mind, her face. All he knew was that look, and he didn't want her to escape from him. He also didn't want to be a bad husband. Lee Jian's heart pounded wildly. She was scared. Her fingertips were freezing cold. Fortunately, he didn't hold a weapon to threaten her. The boss noticed her embarrassment at that moment. Knowing exactly who Che really was would be very useful. At night, Lee Yeon returned to her room and lay face down on the bed. Today was really long. She was exhausted from trying to avoid him all day because he kept clinging to her. Che wanted to be by her side all the time, but she had to lie that she needed some privacy, using work as an excuse. If he regained his memory of that day, it might happen again. She didn't dare imagine it any further. But that fear made her use herself first. She didn't know if she could get through the night safely. After the doctor's words, everything felt like an imposition. She kept thinking about it. But why did she have to obey the doctor? The contract she signed was simply to take care of Chu until the culprit was caught. Besides, she had no intention of losing control of her life. The question was whether Chu could sleep peacefully alone. At first, she planned to lock the second-floor door with a lock that couldn't be opened from inside to prevent him from going downstairs. But the door had been pried open. Moreover, Chu was doing push-ups up there to train his body, not letting his body weaken. She observed everything clearly. He should have just woken up. Yet he recovered so fast. Although outwardly, he looked like an empty shell. Inside, he was actually a killer. The one who buries love for someone else. If she really considers him her husband, she doesn't know how much she can control him. She just hoped he would sleep peacefully and not come down to the first floor. She didn't want him to find her. Just then there was a knock on the door. Che-yu called her name and told her to open the door. She hurriedly covered herself with the blanket. He tried to turn the doorknob. She prayed he would go back to his room. He received no response. Finally, he left. Lyseon heard footsteps and wondered if he really left. To be sure, she quietly approached the door, and then Che-yu's voice sounded asking if she really thought he had left. The word startled her. She fearfully stepped back and covered Che-yu's mouth tightly. He didn't want her to leave. He knew it was her. He recognized the scent of wet grass still on her clothes. Even outside the door, he could smell it. He began to bang hard on the door. Without her, he didn't know who he was. Even with hands and feet, he still felt unreal. He wondered if he was human or if it was all just a dream. He didn't know if he was crazy. He wanted Lee Jung-yoon to give him an answer. Chu wanted her to recount the past, even if it was an ordinary story. It would give him some faith that he truly existed. Chu's heavy breathing sounded. He was in pain. If he wanted, he could easily break down the door. But in this chaotic state, he couldn't. She kept calling him a cute guy. Gentle, sweet, friendly. All those lies she had spoken were what restrained Che-yu. He didn't know what this feeling was. After thinking for a while, she finally called his name. Chae-yu looked up to listen. The eyes of this killer, the artist painted them terrifyingly, perfectly capturing the indifference inside. She said she was bathing and completely naked. A little shampoo got into her eyes. She softly said this situation was not suitable to recall old stories. The space suddenly fell silent. Chae-yu understood she was right. He nodded. I get your meaning. Then he also went upstairs to shower. She thought she had controlled Chu, but before leaving, he turned back and told Lee Jong he was fine, then left without another word. That night she still had nightmares. Chae-yu from 2 years ago wore black clothes, holding a bloody weapon, seemingly harassing her. And the next day, Chu fell into a deep sleep. Leon told the boss not to come too close or he might wake up. The boss asked her directly if Cho had chased her because she secretly peeked while he was bathing. Leon immediately said no. She asked the boss to go outside so as not to wake him. But after that night, Chu slept for a whole week, with some chaotic episodes damaging his nerves. But then everything quickly became vague, like a dream, and then returned to normal. Even if SAO, she had regained her peaceful life. She just hoped everything would continue like that. Or at least she thought so. So Leon began to dream within a dream. She saw herself writing bitter words about herself being an unwanted child, born from a mistake, only full of suffering, and many other things. Tears fell heavily. She tried to wipe them away, but the pile of papers was too much, forming a tower that collapsed. Crashing down on Lee Jeon, she woke up, raising her hand to the ceiling. It was just a nightmare. But in reality, that day something happened. Mrs. Chu entered the room to check on her. Leon said she had just had a nightmare, then apologized for falling asleep. The boss told her not to worry. Work was light today. She could rest. However, Leon wanted to work. She wanted to check the tree in front of the restaurant, worried it would wither. The boss reminded her that dealing with the restaurant owner was not easy. They only argued in the end. But Leon didn't care. She went to wash her face and looked in the mirror. Today was like any other day. When she arrived at the restaurant, the owner greeted guests, but upon seeing Leon, he immediately kicked her out, not wanting to talk. Nevertheless, Leon scolded him for deliberately letting the tree in front of the door die. Last time he secretly poured herbicide, and this time watered it with seawater. She knew because the soil tasted salty. The owner didn't care about the soil's taste or the tree's survival, but because customers were inside ordering, he pushed Lee Jeon outside. He didn't want her to ruin business just because of a tree. He knew what happened with the school principal, and when construction materials were dumped on the tree, and he wouldn't let her cause the same trouble for his shop. Yes, Leon understood that clearly, but if she left now, who would do it? Who would save this tree? She clearly knows he wants to remove it just because it blocks the restaurant sign, and people, maybe the sign is more important than the tree. Life has always been like that. Only humans decide who lives and who doesn't. But the tree does not, she said while tightening her grip. If the tree has taken root, that is the reason to coexist with it, yet people only try to kill it. She cannot understand why he has to do that. At night, Leon no longer remembers how many years it has been since she had a complete day. She once thought she was fine, maybe because she hasn't slept well for a long time. A quiet week passed. Nothing happened as she wished, and it was no surprise that Chu slept very peacefully. Perhaps because of that, during that short time, all kinds of sounds had echoed. So tonight, when she realized the silence in him, she found it even stranger. When Chu woke up, she had no time to think about her own matters. Thinking like that was not good either. She herself didn't understand why she thought that way. She was gradually addicted to that feeling of excitement. Suddenly she heard a noise on the second floor. She immediately went up and opened the door to see what was going on. She thought the sound must have come from somewhere else. She believed that. But the truth was, Chu was crying. He begged someone to leave quickly, and she couldn't believe he was crying. Maybe he was having a nightmare. Surely in his dream he was still chasing his victims. Maybe that was the price for the bad things he had caused. But Chu shouted to hide her. It seemed she was wrong. Her boss had warned her to beware of this wild man. But now he looked more like a deer being chased by hunters. Leon wiped her tears with the edge of her shirt and softly told him not to cry anymore. He had to wipe his own tears. Crying was useless because no one would listen. Only the trees and flowers would be eternal friends. She muttered to herself that today, she tried checking the soil under a tree root. It tasted salty. Soil shouldn't be like that, exactly like the salty taste in his tears, who had hurt him so much. That scene reminded her of the tree in front of the restaurant. A bad premonition crept inside her. Maybe that was why he woke up a week ago, and then never fully recovered. Maybe only when lying next to her would he have some hope of waking up. So she gently lay down beside him. Maybe she was haunted. Normally she was very scared, but she turned toward him, her sad gaze. Today was a day she wanted to cry. Everything had been bottled up inside her for a long time. An innocent, hardworking girl with a kind heart, but was enduring such injustice. The next morning, Chu opened his eyes, his gaze directed at the ceiling. He wondered how long he had slept, surprised to find Lee Jong beside him. He had slept next to her since last night, and knowing she was always by his side made him happy at this moment. The only thing he was sure of was that Lee Seon was the tree doctor and his wife. The only face remaining in his memory was hers. He began to recall a few things. The first time he saw her, even though she insisted she was his wife, He still couldn't stop himself from looking away, but he himself didn't understand why he looked at her that way. Her expression then was confused and scared. Nothing like the image of a wife seeing her husband wake up. She had no wedding ring marks. There were no photos of the two of them in the house. She didn't even open the door to welcome him. He wanted to ask why she cared for him until he recovered if she no longer wanted to keep him. Just then, Lee Yeon opened his eyes. Cho softly asked if he had slept well. She didn't know he was already awake. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. He asked Leon how long he had slept. She answered about 8 days. Chu was now certain of one thing. Without her, he could not have woken up. She might not fully understand. Maybe she only thought it was a spiritual matter, but he realized it when they slept next to each other. He wanted to be with her every night and had no intention of letting her go, declaring from now on he would sleep in Leon's room. Sunlight filtered through the window, making the space unusually warm. Then Leon began preparing for the botanical garden presentation. All the directors of local hospitals would attend. Leon brought along the treatment diary in case of emergencies. Spruce Hospital had few cases, but never let a single tree die. As a doctor, she had to be the pride of the hospital. But it wasn't just the two of them attending. Lee Seon turned back and noticed Rachu looking completely different, very cheerful and lively. His personality also changed. New haircut done by Mrs. Chu. Clothes also bought by her. He went to express gratitude and appreciation for his mother-in-law's kindness. Now everything would become more complicated. If both went out together, it would be very hard to lie that they were husband and wife, and just a small external trigger could make his memories return. Somehow she had to stop that. She asked Cho if she wanted to rest today. Are you worried something will happen? That was what Chu asked back. Lee Yeon replied no, but in her heart she knew the truth was indeed like that. There would be a lot of trouble. He wondered why she needed an excuse so quickly. His eyes briefly showed suspicion. Lee Seon said it was dangerous out there. He was not satisfied and asked again what was dangerous. He said something strange, but she said it was especially dangerous for him, so she lowered her head to avoid his gaze and shyly answered, because he was too attractive, so handsome, super handsome. He didn't like hearing this, but she growled, he was too handsome, as if to affirm her point. No one was convinced. The boss laughed sarcastically while he was silent like holding a fish. She continued to analyze to reinforce the reason that if he went with her, the old men in the industry there would definitely be jealous when they saw a young, handsome guy like a movie star appear at the conference. She could not let him go with her by any means. After saying that she thought she might have convinced him, but looking at her, she noticed his face redden. So you intend to hide him just because he is too attractive? Is that how you see him? Lee Seon immediately replied yes. Even so, she still wanted him at home. She wanted to keep him just for herself. So he questioned. Lee Seon didn't know how to answer, but once said she couldn't deny it because they were originally husband and wife, just separated after the accident. Of course, she affirmed she wanted to keep him just for herself because he was too beautiful. So beautiful like this, should be executed, why live to suffer? Of course, the female lead didn't say that. I made it up. That made his face even redder. He told her then don't go out either. He reassured her not to worry too much. Even if she went out, he would follow her instructions. Hearing this, she felt the situation gradually became strange. For some reason, every time Cho spoke, Lee Yeon was left speechless. Heaven wouldn't accept it, but Earth had to. The boss waved her hand, calling both to start, and finally their first trip began. They attended the Wadham project presentation. The directors there immediately recognized the presence of the Spruce Hospital members. They began to criticize Lee Yeon about her upcoming marriage, saying she was not likable and had no advantages. They mocked that Mrs. Chu was an old withered tree, and the other was an immortal flower. Lee Seon already disliked places like this. This industry was full of middle-aged men, about 50 to 60 years old, full of power. When women attended, they only paid attention because of gender, not related to ability. He held her hand and asked if she wanted eyes or mouth. She was startled when he held her hand tightly and said, "Could you speak a little clearer?" He softly said he noticed the men here kept talking. Seeing her, he asked if she wanted him to shut their mouths or poke their eyes if she didn't want to speak. He just needed a title to protect his girlfriend, assassin style. So cool, man. Leon imagined the worst scenario and feared the incident would appear on the news. She couldn't let him do that. She didn't want to hear him say such things anymore. She made him promise. Chu said he tried to show gentleness. Hasn't he done well? She looked straight into his eyes, which were now clearer. But from those eyes, all she saw was blind faith and foolishness. But strangely, she wasn't afraid of this man now. She reminded him of his promise before starting to go. He replied yes. He promised to do everything she allowed. Che smiled brightly. His eyes and expression completely changed. The whole hall heard the couple's promise. All eyes turned to them. Indeed, Cho's appearance made everyone pay more attention. The press conference was about to start. Representatives of hospitals had to enter the conference room. At this moment, Lion released her hand. She said she would be right back. Both wished her luck. As she walked, she felt her palm burning hot. It seems like the body temperature has changed. The Wadham project will be the largest botanical garden in South Korea, built in Wado. There will be a tropical dome park, an outdoor ecological park, artificial waterfalls, and natural forests. A unique construction is taking shape, but this amazes everyone. The simulation is now complete. From what is seen, this will be the most beautiful botanical garden in South Korea. All hospitals compete. They will have top clients. One person can hardly believe they were invited to participate. But what's difficult? This must be a task for the best doctors. Wadham gathers the rarest and most expensive plants in the world and cannot casually choose representatives. Because they don't know if they are fraudsters or not, a representative stood up to announce the selection will be in a competition format. The entire process will be recorded for promotional videos of the project. So they must remember that there will be a film crew regularly following the winning hospital, which will sign a contract for 15 years with Wadham. It's like striking gold. Everyone is ready to participate. The meeting ends. Mrs. Chu asks if she plans to join. This is a great opportunity. At this moment, Lee Yun says everything will be recorded by cameras. Cho asks if she is afraid of the cameras. She replies that she just wants to live quietly. She doesn't want awkward scenes to be recorded. Suddenly, someone calls her that's Director John of Dongsail Hospital. The old man happily says it's a pleasure to see her again. This man was her former superior before she came to the hospital. Spruce, and she didn't have a good relationship with that bespectacled guy. He is Hwang Do-jun, Jo Gyeong-tron's favorite student. He never thought the two would meet again. The director says they used to be friends, but now must cooperate as before. She can't believe he said that with that smile many years ago. When she was an intern under Jo Gyeong-jon's guidance, she had just graduated from university and was at the lowest position. The working environment then was very suffocating, but to open a hospital, she had to endure hours of practice, so she gritted her teeth. What bothered her most was Hong Do-jun's constant harassment. He always followed her, staring and judging with harsh words. When she couldn't stand it anymore, she reported to the director, but she was immediately fired. The director didn't side with her. He even acted as if nothing happened. Returning to the present, Director Doogie took Mrs. Chu away. She looked after her helplessly. The bespectacled man stared at her with his hand reaching out to say something, but immediately, Cho pulled her to sit beside him so he couldn't touch her, quite a surprising action. He realized she was very tense and asked who the bespectacled guy was. He must be someone he didn't remember. She replied he was her intern friend. Before that, Chu didn't know him, so he didn't need to worry. Do-jun pressed to ask who the man next to her was. Seeing this, Chae wanted her to introduce both. They both pressured her to speak immediately, too much pressure on the main character. With no other choice, she told Do-jun that the man lived with her. In Jo-jun's eyes, it was hard to believe she married him. Lee Seon deliberately said so, thinking that living together was easier to accept than marriage, but it turned out like this. Chu saw her worried and panicked. He whispered to her to just nod, seeing no reaction. Cho gently pressed her waist to urge her to comply. She was embarrassed but finally did, and Cho introduced himself as her husband. That stunned Do-jun. It was ridiculous. Lee Seon was not that kind of person. She wasn't the type to date someone like that. First, she didn't like being around others. Who could understand? A woman who visits plants every night and quietly fertilizes them on weekends, no one could accept that. Do-jun still hadn't changed. He used to say insulting words happily whenever she was slightly different from the norm, and that was what she hated most. Lee Yeon said frankly they were never friends. Many years had passed since she left the hospital. And as you see, she got married, opened a hospital, and lived well. Her tone was angry and sharp as she asked, "Does he still think she is someone he can easily look down on?" That made him angry. He still thinks she's someone he can easily look down on. Is that so? That made him angry, because June, with a serious tone, asked her to show the marriage certificate to prove that the other man was really her husband. Your dad has been putting up with you for a long time. That guy with glasses looks creepy, harassing since college. A life that has nothing to do with anyone, and now annoyed and upset because of someone unrelated. They got married successfully, so what does it have to do with your family? Then even more unreasonable, demanding to see the marriage certificate to prove it. Is there really a person like you in this world, Leon? He was dumbfounded by his absurdity, but just then, Cho Yu spoke up, but the clear eyes he had before disappeared. He returned to his usual deadly version. He only asked Do-jun one thing. "Don't call my wife by her name, or I'll erase you." Those words truly shocked everyone. She broke out in a cold sweat, raising her hand to threaten Jo-jun, but Lee Seon immediately stopped her. She panicked and said both were busy now, so they would deal with it later. Then both quickly stepped out of the building. Jo-jun, still stunned, wondered why he suddenly said he would log himself out. When both went outside the building, she was panting from exhaustion. He approached and asked if she was okay. She replied she was fine, just quite shocked to hear he wanted to sell that guy with glasses salt. Chae-yu hurriedly apologized. Lee Yun told him not to apologize. She was just surprised. This was the first time she heard such words. Chu-yu said he couldn't stand it. Every time that bastard called her by name, his eyes blazed. He had to restrain himself hard to suppress the urge to tear his mouth apart. People like that should be isolated from society. But Lee Seon only now understood. Although outwardly he remained calm, it seemed he could exceed his limits at any moment. Maybe because he was extremely sensitive to her mood. Whenever she was upset, he immediately felt it. All three on the way home, she said nothing, her heart heavy. Lee Yan understood that her feelings shifted directly to Chu. If she let herself get upset in front of him, it was like sending a signal for him to go crazy. So instead of trying to control Chu, She had to learn to be strong, calm in front of this man. No matter what, she was the one holding the leash of a wild dog, and it took courage to keep it. Mrs. Chu asked if she intended to participate. She said yes, she wanted to make Dongsail Hospital bow its head. But as Leon said, she hated cameras. That's true, but this time she wanted to try. Actually, she still didn't like appearing in front of the lens, but this time she wanted to crush the pride of Dongsail Hospital. Moreover, it was also part of the process of becoming stronger. Both saw the boss off. She told both to rest and relax their minds. Leon felt exhausted. Chu shyly apologized to his wife. He felt he hadn't helped much for Lion Hospital. She told him not to worry too much, brother. Past, present, or future, he just needed to be obedient like a dog to help the hospital a lot. But his expression briefly saddened. He felt guilty for feeling useless. Seeing this, she opened her mouth to ask him for something. His eyes lit up, as if eager to be told. But she was embarrassed and suddenly realized she always dug her own grave. Then she shyly said that from now on, there should only be good and happy things. Both looked at each other warmly. It seemed the atmosphere between them had changed. It was best if both went to sleep. She would shower first before going to bed. Che-yu asked if she wanted him to help bathe her. She froze for a moment, then immediately said no. Chu-yu was surprised and asked why his wife looked so shocked. She said she was very conservative. Since childhood, she was taught that after age 7, even sitting close to boys was hard to accept. It sounded strange, but she was raised that way. Cho-yu asked, what about the husband? Does that count? Lee Yeon replied, marriage is not a free pass to do whatever you want. Well then, what is it like? He asked her to teach him. Many things he had forgotten. She suddenly felt that if she kept avoiding like this, she would lose her confidence. She ignored him for a week, not waking him, as if he didn't really need it. Or maybe she was wrong. It seemed that in times like this, Cho's wit became sharper. She was afraid she would be swept away. He put 2 fingers in his pocket, leaned forward, hiding his eyes, waiting for her answer. Leon shyly looked away. She embarrassedly said that him bathing her was a bit too much, but he found it very strange. He said that after all, they had slept together and done many fiery things before, but this was just bathing. Hearing that, she blushed deeply and fell silent. This part's language is inappropriate for the platform, so I will tone it down a bit. He pondered silently. Maybe the reason his wife hadn't found pleasure in that matter was due to some unspeakable reasons. Perhaps they should try to change that, making her stunned by what he was doing. It was precisely her previous words that persuaded him. This time he wouldn't give up easily, and Lee-san had no other choice. He had to accept it. He could only help her relax a little, nothing more. Chu smiled contentedly, a sly smile. She entered the bathroom, telling herself to stay calm. At least that concern made her feel more comfortable than having to endure everything alone. When Chu entered, she felt slightly tense. He sat down gently, massaging her back, then asked, "Do you feel more comfortable now?" "Yes," she said shyly. "Yes," a little relieved. His words and smile gradually lost their humanity. "Then I'll only help you a little bit. So, next time you can still ask me," he chuckled softly. Lee Yan blushed, even more embarrassed. She thought Cho would be surprised by this closeness, but instead, he was calm as if enjoying it. Looking at her, he softly said, "You are always adorable, always thinking of others." She blushed shyly, not understanding why he wasn't embarrassed for a moment. She thought if it were the old Chu, he might have been more forceful in this closeness, but it all stopped at imagination. She quickly pulled him back to reality, handing him a towel. At that moment, Cho noticed a faint scar on her back. Lycian paused, then remembered it was from an accident. Rarely looking in the mirror, she had forgotten. When he asked about the scar, she tried to avoid it. "It's nothing, just an old matter." But why did she have to say that? Maybe she didn't want to reveal it. Summoning all her courage, Che quietly asked, "Is that wound from your family?" Leon was silent. He blurted out that her family must be cruel. She hurriedly explained, "They must have their reasons. Maybe because they love you, they ended up hurting you and leaving that scar?" he asked broadly. She tried to reassure herself, thinking maybe that was a form of love. Loving too much leads to excessive control, even causing violent acts. Love is love accompanied by selfishness and possession. Che recalled since he woke up. Every time he wanted to get close, Leon reacted cautiously, as if always harboring resentment toward intimacy. Leon sighed softly. Love can quickly turn into hatred. Humans are different from plants. They cannot love unconditionally. Once they have tasted bitterness, it's hard to accept. And now everything gradually becomes clear. He slowly understood why she trembled facing him. That could mean in marriage, he had also caused terrible things to her. Leon urged him to quickly hand over the towel. Cho seemed not to notice her words, focusing only on the scar on her back. He softly said, "It looks painful." He thought if he carelessly pressed, Lee Seon's skin would tear apart. Yet he continued massaging her back, but only for today. He wanted both of them to be comfortable while he helped her bathe. Leon didn't understand what comfortable meant when bathing. Chu gently massaged his wife's back with his fingers. She hurriedly told him to wait a moment, but Cho ignored it, still pressing his fingers into the middle of her spine. But inwardly she admitted the feeling was wonderful, yet the warmth from his palm made her hesitant. What exactly was this? Massage should be strong and painful, but she remembered when Cho once asked about the scar on her back. He must be trying to be gentle to avoid hurting her. It was the first time someone asked her that. For so long, everyone assumed the wounds on her body were normal. They whispered, no wonder she turned out like this. Some couldn't understand how her family raised her to be like this. Yet some admired that family because not everyone is willing to take in an abandoned girl. That was how she lived her whole life. But in that moment, he realized she was trying to hold back tears. He asked what she had to endure. But what did it matter if she was about to cry? Did the scars on her body really matter? She scooped some soap bubbles from the bath and splashed them directly on her face. Cho worriedly asked if she was okay. Are your eyes burning? Just splash water on my face. Who splashes soap full of chemicals into their eyes? Nose and mouth too? That's silly. She replied, I'm fine. Still, Cho used a little water to rinse the bubbles off her face. This was too much for Lee Jun to bear. Cho held out his hand, telling her to give her hand so he could wipe it clean. After bathing, both went to bed, her limbs feeling relaxed. Hello, Chu asked if she was sleepy, yet lying on the same bed turned out to be nothing serious. She wished him good night. Chu responded the same feeling. The bed had Chu's warmth, made her feel at ease, although before that he was a very scary person to her. Will the first days beside Chu from morning to night continue like this? Though awkward, but not as bad as she thought. But thinking back now, they are sleeping on the same bed. She suddenly shouted, making Chu startled. She couldn't believe she felt comfortable. Could it be that she was crazy? This man once tried to send her back to her grandparents. She even used a chainsaw to chop his head. She had witnessed he was dangerous and scary. Only now he had amnesia. Yet Chu, with an innocent face, gently asked Lee Yeon, are you sick? Did your back hurt where you touched before this man was clearly very different? In her imagination. Now he took the hit, instead of striking back. She couldn't understand why she hesitated like that. Don't let your guard down, must remind herself. Recall the scenes from 2 years ago. Chu didn't understand what was wrong with her. He grabbed her hand, asked what she was doing. Please don't hurt yourself. He asked why she suddenly acted like that. While before she lay silently, was she uncomfortable, Lizian? Knowing the problem was in Chu's eyes and warm voice from the start, she shouldn't have looked or listened. Chu told her to look straight at him and stay calm, then talk together. Okay, she didn't answer nor say a word. Just said, take your hand off me. Chu, seeing that, asked if she had never been angry at anyone. Maybe that's why she wasn't afraid. He was terrified over there. Damn it, not afraid of anything ever, Grandpa recalled and explained. What happened was lucky. People got over the trauma from that night. He gently lifted her chin, moved closer. She hadn't understood what he intended to do, then felt confused and disordered. She froze, he kept moving forward. He kissed her neck, looked like a vampire sucking blood. He bit hard into her neck. Lee Yoon struggled, asked him to let go because he was hurting her. She tried to endure, but finally cried out she wanted Chu to stop. She kept calling his name and asking him to stop. She pushed him away, but he didn't listen. She asked why he was like that. He always listened when she said stop. Chu grew more impatient. Restlessness came from nowhere. He seemed to crave something, but couldn't find satisfaction. Craving more intensely, she began to tremble weakly, asked Chu, have you recovered your memory now? He only then realized he acted on instinct. Without thinking of her feelings, Lee Seon asked directly, did you do that because you remembered everything? Chu, hearing that sweat dripped her terrified eyes, made him feel like a monster. Maybe this is Chu's true nature before actually he hadn't recovered his memory, just lost control for a moment. He apologized Lee Jeon. He truly regretted, so he decided tonight to sleep in another room to punish himself. He said it didn't matter if it was 1 or 2 months, just let him be like that until she felt comfortable again. He begged her not to wake him. Until then, Leon didn't understand everything, hurriedly called him wait, but Chu decided to leave the room. Leon really didn't know what to do, just called after him. Wait, he said she should stay still. And his eyes seemed to glisten with tears of regret. He said if he stayed near her now, he feared losing control again, so he hoped she would stay put. She didn't know how to respond. He turned and went downstairs. She stood upstairs, shouted down. If he slept alone, he might not wake up for a long time. No, he should sleep on the 2nd floor with her. Otherwise, when she's not with anyone, someone will wake him. Chu slammed the door. Clearly, that was what he wanted. Chu had fallen into his 3rd long sleep one morning when a child passed by the street. He mumbled about insect mating. According to the insect encyclopedia, he read the gender of insects is usually hard to distinguish by eye. Usually, however, if the egg-laying tube extends from the female's tail, it can be easily recognized. The sound humans hear is actually the sound made by males to court females. Even species make females eat part of their body to gain favor, but the boy didn't know that. Behind, another person was silently watching, while Leon reminded the boss to pay attention. The first tournament of the Wadam project had been announced. Mrs. Chuja curiously asked what kind of contest it would be. She had heard that the hospital representatives had complained about the competitions in the project. B.A. Lee Jong said it was a tree pruning contest. Mrs. Chu thought it was too simple, no different from a preliminary test. Even a child could do it. Lee Jong replied that this challenge was a bit different from what the boss thought. The tree was as tall as 30 meters, and the lift truck was banned, meaning they had to climb up by themselves. At first, both laughed at this strange test. But then Mrs. Chu-cha got angry, thinking they were treating her like a joke. 30 meters was like a 10-story building. Climbing it was like seeking death. She shouted angrily and insisted on filing a complaint. B.A. Leon gently hugged her waist and advised her to calm down first. Everyone knew. As a tree doctor, you often have to climb to perform surgery. It was a silent job requiring great physical strength, Mrs. Chuja sighed. Still, having to climb 30 meters to care for the tree was unacceptable, especially with the lift truck band. Leon understood that well. At that moment, the boy from earlier was curious to see what was behind that door. He cautiously peeked inside. It turned out to be Lee Seon's room. Inside, Chu was sleeping soundly on the bed, sunlight shining on his face. The child curiously looked closely. It was the first time he saw a male in this hospital. In children's language, they called men males. I translated according to context. He quietly stepped closer to the bed. He pulled back the blanket covering him. The boy muttered, "This male has a head. A body with arms and legs, fully formed with 2 hands and 2 feet. A notable feature was the large hands and feet. So long they hung over the edge of the bed, along with a high nose that grew from the forehead. The male's chest was huge." Just then, Lion entered and immediately yelled at the boy to stop. The boy called her director. Lion asked the boy when he arrived. If he intended to come, he should have informed her first. But since he was here now, she told him to follow her. Staying in this room was very dangerous, but before leaving, Lee Gilbeck told her that this person was a rare species, a male species he had never seen before. The man sleeping there was truly astonishingly handsome, looking strong and tough. He seemed capable of hunting troublesome beasts. "Yes, he can hunt, and even eat a live chicken raw," he said. We learned that Gilbert was only 7 years old and was the hospital's unofficial entomologist. The boy was neglected at home. So he often came to the hospital. Through Gilbert's eyes, humans were just like insects, also males and females. Lee Seon said that man was not normal. He was very dangerous. Gilbert thought that strong man was already dangerous. When she opened the curtain, she suddenly got scared to see Cho. June was secretly watching her through the window. She was extremely horrified. Really, encountering perverts who spy and stalk like this was a terrible nightmare for women. She shouted, asking what he was doing here. He ignored the question and instead asked why such a kid was allowed into her house. Gilbeck said that male was strange because June had a belly as well as head and legs. Its shape was strange, not beautiful at all, with 2 arms and 2 legs. It would be hard to survive, as if trapped outside the window. Its eyes were also very unusual, looking both perverted and useless. June didn't understand what was wrong with this child's mind. The boy's words offended him. Lee Yun told Gilbeck to stay here and eat some candy while she went out to deal with that dirty insect. Gilbeck agreed because he always kept his promises. At this moment, Lee Yun turned to complain to Ju Jun that he dared to enter someone else's house without permission. If he didn't leave immediately, she would call the police. June, curious, asked if that kid was her son. Lee Seon felt deeply insulted. He still thought she couldn't have a family or live the way she wanted, and she seemed to challenge him. He said that kid was his son. He couldn't believe she could have a child with another man. He also asked if it was because of that child that she disappeared from Dongsail Hospital. Lee Yun replied that she didn't disappear, but was fired by Director Sa because of June. He said that was nonsense. And Lee Yun replied that she didn't disappear, but was fired by Director SA, and because of Jun, he said that was nonsense. With all the care he gave her, there's no way she had time to see another guy. There's no way he wouldn't notice. So how was that child born? How could that be? That's impossible, Jun said sternly. He demanded Lee Zion go immediately with him to the local office to show him the documents proving blood relation. He wouldn't believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. Look at this crazy guy. Really frustrating. Afraid of men like this too much. She immediately took out her phone to call the police to report that a stalker had broken into her house because Jun asked what she was doing. Lee Yon told the police that this harasser might have been drinking and was speaking nonsense, causing trouble. She asked them to come quickly. He pointed his finger at her, demanding she not treat him like a criminal. She was the one making a big deal while everything would end immediately if she gave him the certificate. That attitude of his is what really drives people crazy. What the hell? Coming to your house and forcing me to give a birth certificate and prove blood relation. Second Lee Seon. Knowing the reason why Joran has persistently clung to her all these years is not because he loves her. After she was kicked out of Dongseo Hospital, surely Joran went to flirt with all kinds of women, but in the end was rejected by all. So when he met her again after all that time, he thought she was easy, but she was the one who witnessed with her own eyes the scene of burying a person alive and almost losing her life. She had to live with a murderer for 2 years, so why should she now be afraid of a twisted pervert like Jojo? She casually grabbed a handful of dirt, raised her eyes threatening to throw it at him. Her voice hardened. I have lived quietly. Standing too long. You think I'm easy to bully and to deal with, right? Now then, come here. From now on, stay away from my life. This is the only warning. And now she has a scary husband? He must understand that. His temper is no joke. She herself has experienced it. Her husband is extremely strict, and Cho Jun is only good at greetings. But if he keeps approaching her like that, her husband will definitely not let it slide. After saying that, she slammed the door in front of Cho Jun. Cho Jun no longer recognized the woman he once knew. Lee Seon used to be a bit lonely and easily immersed. An easily subdued woman. Could the problem be that he hasn't been by her side for a while? Just one moment he took his eyes off Lee Seon, and that was his defeat. But things would not stop there. Cho Jun swore to make her submit once again, and from that day on his harassment began again. at a more dangerous level. A few days later, the police came to Lee Yeon's house. The officer asked if she was calling to complain again. Lee Seon's reaction confirmed it, but she was a bit embarrassed because this was not the first time. She knew the officer would just see it as coincidence. But how can it be called coincidence when she has to face the same person 3 times a day, even every day? Jo Jun's harassment was continuous, but the officer said since no specific damage had occurred, they could not ban Cho Jun from coming around. Lee Seon questioned that every morning Cho Jun left red roses at her door, but the officer replied that at that time Cho Jun was still at work, no reason to waste time bringing flowers to her house. For now, they couldn't do anything to help her. Leon was furious, trembling. She clenched her teeth, clenching her hands tightly when the police had no courage to protect her. She was sure that guy was always watching her. Clearly, he was the one who harassed her in the past, but the officer said it was just a feeling, just like her first complaint on the mountain, when she said she saw a murder, but later they confirmed it was false. Furthermore, there was no record that Cho Jun had ever harassed her. In short, her lawsuit was invalid. Finally, the police left. It was getting dark. She entered Cheo's room and quietly looked at him for a while as he slept. Mrs. Chuja told Lee Jeon that if she intended to wake him up, she should prepare well before doing so. At that moment, Leon turned and asked her what she meant. Mrs. Chuja replied if she wanted to see Cho as a murderer until the end, then she should decisively turn her back and leave. But if she wanted help from him, at least treat him like a human being. Right now, that guy is just an empty shell with nothing inside, and Chu is still the person she once saw back then. A complete stranger. Neither she nor he really knew. If she couldn't clearly distinguish, then don't wake him up. That is what Mrs. Chuja wanted to say. Lee Yeon repeated that a murderer is always a murderer. She always reminded herself of that to keep her distance from Chio. Because of that, the feeling of guilt when deceiving someone who knows nothing about his past also lessened a bit. Her mind couldn't stop thinking, struggling internally, even while making biofertilizer for plants. She couldn't stop thinking about what Mrs. Chu said. She thought she always wanted him to sleep and never wake up again. Yet now when she needed Cho, she kept taking advantage of him for her own purposes. She herself was surprised at that shallowness, but vaguely believed that if Chu truly woke up, he would decisively end this situation. Maybe that was the faith she had, believing in a murderer. On second thought, she wasn't believing in a murderer, but in the current person, a stubborn, blind Chu who put all his heart into her. Lost in thought, she didn't realize it was already midnight, yet thanks to that, it seemed she had rearranged part of her thoughts. Looking out the window, she saw someone watching her. It was Jun. His vile eyes behind the glass were watching her every move. Nausea and fear surged within her. The fear made her cover her mouth with her hand. What he was doing was disgusting. A pervert, whispered Jun outside. Look away from the glass, June said. I don't have a husband. I will be your husband. Any grandparents reaching this part would be gradually haunted like me. Unimaginable. Seeing a 10-year-old kid peeking through the door, spying on me every day. I'd probably stab him too much. Chu suddenly woke up in his room, eyes blurry with tears. It seemed he had just had a nightmare. He immediately turned to check if anyone was beside him, and indeed, someone was there, Lee Jeon. She was lying asleep next to him. She startled and opened her eyes wide. She realized Cho had woken up. He asked if she was okay while sleeping. Cho gently asked if he had escaped punishment or wanted to continue punishing himself a bit more. His eyes were slightly red, lips curved slightly. She was embarrassed by his words. His voice trembled faintly like a thread. He asked if she was okay all this time. At this moment, Lee Yoon replied that Cho had been forced to sleep for 8 days, and during those 8 days, every night he cried in torment from nightmares. She didn't know what he dreamed of, but each time he cried miserably like that. Despite thinking a lot, she let him wander in nightmares, and now, she felt guilty for leaving him alone. Cho saw the sparkling tears in her eyes and asked what was wrong. Had something happened? She replied nothing, just some troublesome problems. Actually, she wanted to bear everything herself. She spoke while crying. She had tried everything, taping the window to get fingerprints, even bought animal traps, but that guy kept coming in and out, really driving her crazy. Chu held her hand gently, saying everything was still okay. First, she needed to calm down, then little by little tell everything to find out who was secretly appearing and disappearing. But Leon didn't understand why Cho was so gentle with him. He listened to the whole story. About the continuous harassment these past days. Leon must have endured a lot. Was that why she woke him up? Because she thought he could find a way. Why did Lee Seon believe Chu? Surely she thought she was shameless asking him for help. After 8 days of sleepwalking, he hugged her tightly, comforting her after what she had gone through. Chu didn't blame him, saying she did the right thing. She must have gone through a lot. In time, everything would be fine. From now on, she could leave everything to her husband to rest. But what Lee Jeon didn't know was, Chu was harboring a cruel plan to torment Du-jun, his eyes now cold and deadly. He placed his hand on her shoulder and spoke deeply. From now on, leave everything to your husband. Rest while you can. Leon wanted to speak, but Chu stopped him. You're too kind. Just let me handle it. I will personally exterminate that disgusting insect once and for all. Leon hurriedly said she didn't mean that. She had caught that insect herself, which stunned him. He never thought his wife could handle it like that. The two stepped out of the house, the scene revealed. Du-jun lying sprawled on the ground, mouth taped, mumbling, wanting to speak. The way he was tied was really tight. Lee Yun explained she learned this method in case one day she needed it. Chu asked how she caught him. She replied she used pepper spray. People said it was very effective on that kind of insect, so she prepared it. Then she hit him once with a shovel. The worm mumbling under the tape was not just one hit. He begged her to wait a moment, but Leon exploded all his frustration and beat him repeatedly. Looking at his wife with eyes full of pride, Leon just said it was nothing serious. It was just that when he saw that disgusting bug lurking around the house, suddenly all the resentment inside him burst out. I just did that. Chu smiled softly. Even at that moment, she still tied him up carefully like that. Truly skillful, Lee Jian felt a bit embarrassed, but clearly both of them were very calm. Given the scene with June tied up tightly, they were completely not normal. Neither Lee Jian nor Cho were in a stable psychological state anymore. From now on, he would take care of the rest. You go inside and rest. But before I do anything, Lee Seon still wants to say one thing. I don't want you to be mad at me. It's just that June keeps doubting our marriage. I just want to show him what kind of husband I have. I only ask you one thing. Make sure Jun never appears in front of me again. I don't want you to send him off to sell salt or anything like that. A note for those who don't know. Selling salt is a euphemism. A euphemism in Vietnamese to refer to dying and going to the underworld. In Vietnamese, diem means salt. The second meaning originates from the French colonial period, when smuggling salt brought high profits, but was extremely dangerous and could lead to